The dark secret behind my family's money just destroyed us. My entire life changed the day I opened a letter that wasn't mine. It showed up at my apartment by mistake. A simple white envelope, crisp and impersonal, with my family's home address printed right above mine. A simple mail sorting error, I assumed. The mailman must have just gotten confused. But inside wasn't a birthday card or some casual note from a relative. It was the first thread I pulled that unraveled the dark, suffocating secret behind my family's money. A secret that ignited a war between us. A brutal, quiet war from which none of us would ever truly recover. It was a war fought not on a battlefield, but in the sterile silence of lawyers' offices and over the polished wood of our own dining room table. That I always thought we were the perfect family, defined by our staggering wealth and a bond that seemed absolutely unbreakable. We were the envy of everyone we knew. But it was all a lie. A carefully constructed, beautifully maintained lie that cost us everything. And it all started with that one terrifying piece of paper. An ordinary bill that would become the death certificate for the life I thought I knew. Growing up, the world felt like it was ours for the taking. We didn't just live in a nice house, we lived in the house on the block. You know the one. The sprawling colonial revival with the perfectly manicured lawn that looked like a green velvet carpet, the 3-car garage filled with pristine German cars, and a backyard that looked like it was ripped from a 5-star resort brochure. There was a tennis court we barely used and a pool that was professionally cleaned twice a week. My dad was the architect of this perfect life, the master of our universe. He was a guy who seemed to turn everything he touched into gold. He was impossibly charismatic, brilliant, and just radiated this aura of untouchable success. He'd walk into a room and the center of gravity would shift right to him. My mother was his perfect counterpart, impossibly elegant, perpetually graceful, and the perfect hostess for an endless stream of dinner parties where the laughter and expensive wine flowed as freely as water. She curated our lives, ensuring every detail was flawless, from the flower arrangements to the social calendar. Our lives were just a highlight reel of glorious excess. Summers were spent on the sun-drenched coasts of Italy, staying in villas overlooking the sea. Winters were a blur of private ski lessons and roaring fires in sprawling aspen chalets. I never once had to check a price tag. I never worried about a single bill or the cost of anything. Money was just this abstract concept, a magical force that was always there, solving every problem before it even had a chance to become one. It was our identity, the ultimate proof that we'd made it. My brother Leo and I were the princes of this little kingdom, completely insulated from the harsh realities of the real world. We were taught to value success above all else, and success in our family had a very specific look and feel. I remember one evening I was about 16 sitting with my dad in his study. It was this cathedral of success, all dark wood leather-bound books he'd never read, and the faint, sweet smell of his expensive cigars. I asked him how he did it all, how he built this empire from what he claimed was scratch. He leaned back in his enormous leather chair, took a slow puff of his cigar and just smiled with this distinct glint in his eye. "Hard work and smart risks, kid," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "You gotta be willing to play the game harder than anyone else. You can't be afraid to go all in." I took that as gospel. He wasn't just my father. He was my hero, the blueprint for the man I desperately wanted to become. He made it all look so effortless, so deserved. Looking back now, I can see the cracks were there the whole time, like fine fissures in a porcelain doll, hidden just beneath the shimmering, perfect surface. My mother's smile was sometimes a little too tight, her grip on her wine glass a little too firm. My father would occasionally disappear for a day or two on what he called business trips, returning tired but with a manic energy that I now recognize as something else entirely. His smart risks were a much darker and more desperate game than I could have ever imagined. He wasn't playing the game was playing him. The entire illusion shattered on a completely unremarkable Tuesday. I was 26, living in a nice apartment in the city, trying to make my own way, which was, of course, a laughable effort funded by a generous monthly allowance from my father. The letter was a final notice for a business loan, a staggering 6-figure sum that made my breath catch in my throat. My father's name was on it, but the lender was some obscure company I'd never heard of, something with "ventures" in the title. At first I just laughed it off. This had to be a sophisticated scam, a simple mistake. I picked up the phone to call my dad, fully expecting him to chuckle with me and tell me to toss it in the shredder. He didn't. There was this split second of dead, heavy silence on the line, a void so thick and absolute it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. It was only a moment, but it stretched into an eternity. Then his voice, tight and strained in a way I'd never heard before, said, "It's a clerical error, son. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." He dismissed it way too fast. He was too defensive, his usual easygoing charm replaced by a brittle sharpness. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't believe a word he said. That brief, chilling conversation was the first domino. It planted a seed of doubt that immediately began to grow, twisting its thick, ugly roots around the very foundation of my world. And that's when I knew I had to find out more. The doubt became an obsession, a gnawing feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. The next time I went home for our obligatory Sunday dinner, I did something I had never done in my life. I waited until my parents had gone to bed and I went into my father's home office, a room that had always been his sacred off-limits space. I felt like a criminal, a trespasser in my own home. My heart was pounding with every creak of the old floorboards, my hands slick with sweat. I started looking, not even sure what I was searching for. I just had this gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started with his desk, sifting through neat stacks of papers. Nothing. It was all legitimate business dealings, charity donations, club memberships. Then I moved to the filing cabinet. It was locked. Of course it was locked. A wave of panic and frustration washed over me. I was about to give up when I remembered he sometimes kept a spare key in the humidor on his desk. My hand trembled as I opened it. There, beneath a row of expensive cigars, was a small brass key. My breath hitched. With a click, the cabinet unlocked. I started in the front, pulling out folders. Taxes, household, investments. It all looked normal. But in the very back of the bottom drawer, tucked behind old tax returns from a decade ago, I found a folder. It was thin, unlabeled, nothing special. Inside were statements for a credit card I never knew he had. The balance was almost maxed out. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I scanned the transaction history, my blood running cold. There were cash advances from casino cages in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Dozens of charges for online sports betting sites, some for thousands of dollars at a time. This wasn't the man I knew. The man I knew preached fiscal responsibility and scoffed at get-rich-quick schemes. But what I found next was even worse. Deeper in the cabinet, in another unmarked folder, I found documents for secret investments. And not the blue-chip stocks he'd brag about at dinner parties, but these high-risk, highly speculative ventures, oil futures, volatile biotech startups, cryptocurrency schemes, that had obviously blown up in his face. There were printed out emails with increasingly desperate pleas to investment managers, talk of margin calls and catastrophic, irrecoverable losses. He wasn't just taking risks, he was gambling. Recklessly, pathologically gambling away our entire future. Finding this stuff felt like a deep, profound betrayal, like a kind of financial infidelity that made me question every memory, every piece of advice, every success he'd ever claimed. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found a thick document for a second mortgage on our house. The perfect home, the symbol of all our success and security, was leveraged to the hilt to fund his secret life. He hadn't built an empire. He'd built a house of cards, propped up by lies and debt, and the slightest breeze was about to bring it all crashing down. I couldn't carry this apocalyptic weight alone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my brother's number. I called Leo, my voice a broken whisper as I told him everything from the loan notice to the maxed-out credit cards to the second mortgage. He was silent on the other end of the line for a long time, so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then all he said, his voice flat and cold, was, "We have to tell Mom. Tonight." We staged what felt less like an intervention and more like a tribunal. The three of us, me, a trembling Leo, and my mother, who we had just briefed in her sitting room, sat on one side of our massive, polished dining room table. My father sat on the other, a king alone in his castle. Felt like a courtroom. I laid the papers out on the wood surface between us. The loan default, the casino credit card bills, the mortgage document. All the stark black and white evidence of his lies. The silence in the room was deafening. At first he tried to deny it, to deploy the charm and charisma that had always been his greatest weapons. He laughed it off, calling it a misunderstanding, a series of manageable business setbacks. But his eyes, darting between the incriminating papers and our stony faces, gave away the raw panic churning beneath his composed facade. My mother just stared at the documents, her face completely pale as if all the blood had drained from it. She picked up one of the casino statements, her hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. The betrayal she felt was so raw, so palpable, it was like discovering he'd been having an affair for their entire marriage. In a way he had. This was the ultimate act of deceit, a lie that shattered the very foundation of their partnership. When the full, unvarnished truth finally came spilling out, the sheer scale of the gambling, the secret loans from friends he'd sworn he was helping, the devastating, life-altering losses, the room just erupted. My mother's profound grief turned into pure, white-hot rage. She screamed at him, her voice cracking with pain and decades of unspoken frustrations, a feeling like a decorative accessory to his success, came pouring out. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the lies. The decades of deception. He had made a complete and utter mockery of their life together, of her role as his partner. Then Leo just exploded. He had always idolized our father even more than I did, and his feeling of betrayal was visceral and violent. He lunged across the table, calling him a liar, a fraud, a pathetic old man. My father, stripped of all his power and secrets, didn't even flinch. He just sat there, shrinking in his chair, a broken man being consumed by the wreckage he had created. I tried to be the peacemaker, to find some way to fix it, to suggest a plan, but there was nothing left to fix. The damage was too deep. The trust that holds a family together hadn't just been cracked. It had been pulverized into dust. That confrontation was the first shot fired in the war. My mother filed for divorce the next week. The whole process became this brutal, ugly battleground as her lawyers dug up even more hidden accounts and secret debts, each new discovery another betrayal. The fight ripped through our extended family, forcing relatives and friends to take sides, bringing up old, buried arguments and resentments. Leo sided completely and unequivocally with my mother, cutting off all contact with my dad. He looked at me with open contempt because I couldn't bring myself to completely abandon the man, even if he was a ghost. Our family didn't just break. It splintered into a million warring pieces. The fallout was swift and brutal. The house was sold at a massive loss to cover just a fraction of the astronomical debts. The German cars were repossessed one humiliating afternoon. We were financially and socially ruined. The perfect, polished image we had so carefully projected to the world came crashing down in the most public and mortifying way imaginable. The destruction of a family is a quiet, brutal thing. It happens behind closed doors, in whispered arguments and slammed doors, fueled by secrets most people never see. The wreckage isn't always visible from the outside. Have you ever experienced a secret that tore your family apart? Share your story in the comments below. It's important to know you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating and surviving life's toughest moments, make sure you subscribe. It's been 2 years since that day. The legal battles are mostly over, but the war itself never really ended. The silence between us is its own kind of battlefield. My parents don't speak. My brother and I barely speak. Our conversations are strained, brief, and full of unspoken accusations. I see my father sometimes. He lives in a small rented apartment across town. He's a ghost of the man he used to be, haunted by the choices that cost him everything. He shuffles around his small living room, still talking about the next big thing, as if one more roll of the dice could win it all back. It's heartbreaking. The charismatic giant I grew up idolizing is gone, replaced by this frail, desperate stranger. The shock of losing all our money was one thing, but the most painful loss, the one that still keeps me up at night, was the trust. That's the one thing no amount of money can ever buy back. What my father did, what we now call financial infidelity, doesn't just empty a bank account. It destroys the emotional security a family is supposed to represent. It poisons every shared memory, making you question if any of it was ever real. I have a normal job now, an actual career I built myself. I check my bank account obsessively. I'm terrified of debt. The trauma of it all has reshaped my relationship with money, with success, with everything. I've learned the hardest, most bitter lesson of my life. Money, status, possessions, they're all illusions. They are a fragile stage set that can be dismantled overnight. The only thing that's real is the truth. The only foundation worth building a life on is honesty. My father spent his entire life chasing a fantasy of wealth and power, desperate to prove he was a winner. But in the end, he lost everything that ever truly mattered. The money is gone, and that hurts. But the real truth is, we lost our family long before we lost our fortune. We just didn't know it yet. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button, share, like, and tell us where you are watching from.